Hello and welcome to the testRigor tips and tricks session. And today we're going to talk about how to create stable tests. And how many times have you been working on testing and the HTML changes in the background? And so today, Artem, CTO of testRigor, is going to talk about the reliance on implementation and why you don't really need to rely on that with testRigor. So Artem, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Let me start sharing my screen. And let me first quickly describe the problem, and then I will talk about how we address it in testRigor. Okay, so here is an example of a test case, right? On the left side, Selenium, on the right is testRigor. So what's the problem with the one on the left? And basically, it relies a lot on details of implementation. And this is not what you want to do for your end-to-end tests. Mind you, like you should for unit tests, of course, but for end-to-end tests is not what it is expected and what you're looking for. Because when you're doing end-to-end tests, the whole purpose of end-to-end tests is to make sure that the flow works from end user's perspective. And if instead of presenting or testing it from end user's perspective, you're testing yet again on a level of details of implementation, the challenge is that as soon as page changes slightly, then test will break, even though, again, from end user's perspective, everything is fine. And the examples here are any reliance on IDs, names, or especially XPaths, like in this particular case, would mean that as soon as any of those details will change, your code will break. And that also applies to everyone's favorite data test IDs and any kind of custom attributes. The problem with data test IDs and all those custom attributes is that in 2022, engineers have less and less control over how HTML is generated. In modern world, people use libraries to generate HTML because HTML becoming kind of a low level, just implementation level detail on how things are rendered. This is not the level that modern engineers are working on. We're working on functionality level and use libraries to generate the code. And therefore, we do not have necessarily direct control, and a bug in the library we use might basically render those attributes impossible. Moreover, just asking your engineers to add this stuff might be a challenge in the first place. Anyway, so that's the challenge we are addressing. Now, there are multiple, of course, ways to do that. And in testRigor, you're working on end user's perspective. So you're saying things like click communication preferences, but in a lot of cases, that might not be enough, right? For example, probably the most representative example is this update button, which is the same for two sections here, for personal information and change your password section. This is relatively common-ish for forms, because there are situations, for example, when you move from one location to another, or move money from account A to account B, then you might have two sections of the forms with exactly identical inputs, but those sections are different. For example, this section is where you're moving from, and another section is where you're moving to, but the address fields are identical otherwise. And therefore, you need a way to be able to refer to, for example, the second section or to section where you're moving to for like the same city and address and all those fields. So in this particular example, how do you click on this button and not on that one? And testRigor gives you multiple ways. Of course, you can do just say click second update, but better probably way would be is to hook it up into the section itself, because logically this is a part of the section, right? Logically, this update belongs to this section, and this update belongs to this section, and this is how they are differentiated. So therefore, you can say things like click update below change your password, or you can say things like click update and change your password section. That would also work in testRigor. But point being is this relative location is what would give you the right input, right? When you are entering data in from and to addresses, you can say below from or below to, and that would basically allow you to refer to the right fields correctly, even though they might not have anything there whatsoever, including these names and everything like that. Anyway, or those details would change. So again, your best bet is to make sure that stuff has been expressed from a point of view of end user. So this is one example. Another example would be working with tables. And let me load it again. So basically, oftentimes when we work with tables, you want to make sure that you are dealing with the right element, right? You are, for example, you want to delete the row which contains just this ID. You don't want to delete the first one or whatever random one. You want to delete the line which contains this ID. And there are different syntax how to do it. You can express it in tables terms, as an example above, or you can rely on the double relative location. You can say things like click on the second button below actions and on the right of SPK2. So that would basically will create an intersection of from two references as actions and SPK2. Like we'll highlight this area, and you'll be able to click on these locations. So this is one, and testRigor supports up to 4 relative locations by nesting them in. So you can say, hey, like select this area by those references, and within that area, you can define another references. So the references, this is references within references. Moreover, let me show you the more fine-grained syntax to refer to the stuff, and that would make sense in a second. If you go to documentation, and in documentation section, there is a referencing location section where you might want to go, and this is how you can refer to elements in general. And this is a section, I'm talking about subsection saying selecting elements in reference to other elements. This is what I'm talking about. So this is different ways how you can refer a single reference, right? Different relative locations. It could be diagonal and could be below up, and there is also near in there. And why I scrolled in here is I want to point out several interesting points in here. So first of all, when we're saying things like below actions, what does it mean? What does it mean one element is below another? Well, of course, if this element is small and it's completely consumed below this text in here, like in this particular example, there is no question what it is. But what if this element is large and this referencing element is small, and when you're saying below, it's just only partially intersects. For example, if you're talking about the whole line in here, the whole row for this table, it has probably, I don't know, like 20% overlap with this column. Right? Does it mean it is below this text? Or maybe it is actually below some other text, which actually has more intersection with this row. So, like for example, additional data text is larger. Therefore, when we're saying below, did you mean that below actually should be this row should be below this additional data, not below actions? So therefore, in order to address this, we have a way to specify what does it mean to be below. To clarify in a little bit more details, what do you mean? By default, it would be completely below, meaning that the overlap area is at least 30%. So we did it 30% because there's a lot of situations like even, oops, where is it? Like even here is where intersection might not be completely. For example, if you're trying to say, click on update below current password is quite small, right? So if you're looking just below current password, update has only partial intersection. So what we have found is that from humans' perspective, it's around 30% is roughly what people mean when they say below. It should be below and overlapping by at least 30%. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes what we mean by below is we mean somewhere below the cutting line. So for that, we have this element roughly. So what would it do is it would say, hey, like this is, if you say click on update below, roughly below, change your password. What would it mean is it will find change your password, create a cutting line, and everything below this cutting line would be considered roughly below. So this way, it doesn't have to intersect with this text in particularly. It would be considered below. In case of this, in case of the example of this table, this input, this delete button is below actions clearly because it has 100% intersection of this column if you draw from the actions. However, it's not below with this default definition of ours, or we call it, it's not completely below additional data. However, it is roughly below additional data. What does it mean? If you get additional data text, create a cutoff line in here, everything which is below this cutoff line would be roughly below. So it is roughly below additional data, but it's not below additional data. It's not completely below. Moreover, even that is not enough in some cases. So in some cases, you want to say, yeah, but it should intersect, like in this row, for example, but intersection might be a little bit lower than 30%, which you have as a default. For that use cases, you have intersection with at least 20 or 10% overlap or whatever percent you want, or you actually, in some cases, you want to increase it. You say, hey, it should be at least 60% overlap. If this is what I mean, in this scenario by below. So you can actually fine tune it by specifying specific percentages. So this is one. So you have control over the meaning of below, because below would mean different things in different circumstances, and you have a way to address it. This is one. And before we switch to the questions, I want to point out one more very important thing, and that is the default behavior of multiple relative locations. So if you're saying things like below actions and on the right of SPK2, then first reference becomes a roughly reference automatically. Why? Because it had been designed. So unlike this verbiage, which refers to tables where you would have complete below reference, when you're saying below something and on the right of something, we expect that the first reference is a section. And because it is a section, we thought that you probably would want it to be roughly. So if you have a double reference, like below something and on the right of something, the first reference would be roughly below and the second would be completely on the right. So this way, it would basically literally get all of this cutoff line and whatever's on the right. It will still work in this particular example, might not work in your example. You can fix it, however, by saying something completely below actions and on the right of SPK2. This way, you'll achieve basically the same as you would do with tables, which by saying table, you're already giving a tip on how relative location should behave. So anyway, so this is what I wanted to talk about, where, as you can see, is relative locations is quite a complex topic. On that, I would like to stop and switch to questions, please.
Does anyone have any questions? You can put them in the chat, or I can open your mic and you can ask them out loud. Peter, yes, Peter, I can open your mic. Go ahead, Peter.
Arjun, I'm just wondering, I know you guys constantly improve your application, your product. So is there a constant improving? Like at times we've had some issues with the location where it doesn't pick up, and some of it related to obviously our understanding how the scripting goes and stuff. But how often do you improve it? Every time you do a bit push out, or how often do you improve this stuff? I guess it's
that's pretty much set in stone almost, because we have a huge number of customers using it right now pretty intensively. So we cannot really change that behavior that much anymore. It'll break.
Okay, so when was the last time you pushed out it? When was the last time you pushed out enhancements? Just because I want to take a look at what we've done and see if there's better ways than what we did previous. Have you pushed out this kind of enhancement recently, or is this core functionality been there for a while?
This is a core functionality have been there for a while. We probably don't do a good job of going through it and explaining it in more details on onboarding sessions, but it had been there for quite some time. And like the reason why we have the Slack channels with all our customers is that if something doesn't work as you would expect, this is where you ping us, and will help to look at it and help you to fine-tune stuff. For example, in some cases, you might need to enable nested iframes support and all this different kind of stuff.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Does anybody else have any questions? I can unmute your mic. Right. So is there anything else that you want to share, Artem, and to wrap up with?
Oh, I just have a question. Are we, you're recording this. Can we get a copy of the recording just for reference or?
Yes, I send the recording out after or a link to it. So should come by email to you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yep, there is another thing which might affect relative locations, and you have to be careful with that. So there is one setting which is pretty impactful in testRigor. If you go to settings and go to speed optimizations and scroll down to the very bottom, there is this getting visibility of elements. So how do we work with elements on the page? And by default, it is visible first. What does it mean is that we will only work with elements which are visible to end user at that moment on that page. So the ones which you can see on the screenshot. However, if you create batched approach, it will go through all of the page and you'll be able to work with all even potentially visible elements. For example, something is below scroll line, you can't see it, but you might be able to scroll to it. So keep in mind that the default approach is visible first. And that would mean that whatever you're working with must be visible on the page. So you should scroll to it or something like that. Other than that, I think.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Then the session next week is going to be on email testing. And we look forward to seeing you there, and we will be sending out this recording. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.